To formally open our program, we would like to first start with a decorum briefing. I would like to request that you may turn your video on or off, but kindly remain on mute for the duration of the webinar. And now, for our opening address, let's please give the floor to Ms. Maria Teresita Pastor Medado, PhD, convener of UNDRR PH and president of Asia Pacific College.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Danny, for that brief introduction. I'm really, when I say warm greetings to all, it is really warm, okay, literally warm. And special thanks for helping us put together this series with a very warm appreciation and, a welcome to UNDRR Philippines, to the greater UNDRR Global. So, Branwen Martha Miller, our gender advisor for UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, thank you for being here, all right, and supporting us in this effort. Anita Codalon, External Relations Officer, UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. We could not have made it without you as well. And of course, thank you, UNDRR PH colleagues and co-founders who are, I think they are here now, Violeta Seva, Angie Safra, Marquesa Reyes, Lisa Celerio, Joanna Rose Ladaran Minet, Aguisando Jerusalem, Pearl Turley, and Lucy Barandoco, I saw a while ago. Thank you for all your support, and thank you for raising the flag of UNDRR Philippines. We're also happy to welcome our speaker, Shaila, Shahid, Chair, Board of Directors, Gender Advisor, Tomorrow City, Senior Advisor, Pitachala, Forest and Biodiversity Conservation Initiatives, and National Alliance for Drowning Prevention. I'd like to begin again by saying the heat is on. It's on upon us. Extreme heat, really, literally, is scorching the Philippines today. The mercury has soared to unbreakable levels, with the heat index reaching 45 degrees centigrade or 113 Fahrenheit in some areas. Imagine stepping into an oven. In other provinces in the Philippines, the heat index even hit a staggering 47 degrees centigrade. 30 cities and municipalities are expected to experience danger level of heat, with a heat index of reaching 42 degrees centigrade or higher. El Nino weather patterns have exacerbated the scorching conditions this year. Around half of the country's provinces are officially in drought. Other neighboring countries, as a matter of fact, are praying for rain to provide relief from the scorching weather. I really didn't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but I suppose this is exactly what confronts us as UNDRR, namely the increasing rate of climate-related disasters. It also undermines our ability to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. Not to forget, to create a net zero carbon world, we need rapid changes across key sectors like food, energy, and health. This seminar series is our response to what troubles us today. It may not be much today, but awareness of issues and solutions practiced by our women in UNDRR will certainly be an eye-opener. Today, we begin flying the colors of UNDRR, hovering above us to bring action forward. We learn more by practice. We learn more in a community of practice, and UNDRR is a community of practice. We stand by our blazing colors that represent our community commitment. May I present to you the UNDRR colors proudly. Our four colors says it all. Our path that lines the road towards resiliency and agility. Moreover, it is our call to action. Red. Red is our battle cry for policy making, symbolizing the blood, sweat, and tears that women poured into shaping survival policy during disasters. Bold strides forward, that is the meaning of red. Turquoise. is our color for education. It's about creating systematic and organized opportunities for understanding disaster risk reduction and turning this knowledge into action from school age onwards. We aim for lasting impact. Therefore, maybe it might be a good idea to ignite the interest of generations of risk reducers. Orange, this is our call for community capacity building, fueling resilience efforts among communities of practice, the LGUs, private sector foundations, and industry partners. Blazing Orange will inspire more communities to find best solutions together. Purple is our call to women leaders in disaster risk reduction. We wear the crown with responsibility. By governance, it is not about who governs, but more about who we serve, developing policies and programs that benefit all, especially those most aggrieved. Today begins UNDRR Revolution of Colors. Today, we start carrying the torch to light our path with the colors of UNDRR. What better way to begin this journey than by driving action by example? And carrying the torch with us are our UNDRR women across the world. And I'm happy to announce that we have representations from Afghanistan, Australia, Bangladesh, Brazil, Cambodia, Cameroon, Canada, Fiji, India, Indonesia, Jordan, Kenya, Mongolia, Nepal, New Zealand, Nigeria, Pakistan, Papua New Guinea, Peru, Samoa, Sierra Leone, Sri Lanka, Sweden, Thailand, Tokelau, Turkey, United Kingdom, and Yemen. Today, we present to you our speaker who will color yet our path, Shaila Shahid, winner of the 2023 UNDRR Excellence Award. Thank you very much for joining us today. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tata, for that very heated and warm welcome. And now we turn mic over to Branwen Martha Millar, the Gender Advisor from UNDRR, for her opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Danny, and thank you, Dr. Tata, for that really inspirational scene setting. And warm welcome, everyone, to this first webinar in the exciting series that is being led by UNDRR Philippines. My name is Branwen Miller. I'm the Gender Advisor for UNDRR, and I manage the UNDRR network in the Asia-Pacific region. We are hugely grateful to the UNDRR Philippines network, and particularly to Dr. Tata and Danny, for planning this wonderful webinar series, and we're really happy for you all joining us today. The overall goal of UNDRR is really to empower women to attain leadership and enhance their role in decision-making and disaster risk reduction. And the purpose of this Women Leading Resilience webinar series is so that we can hear from inspirational women across the Asia-Pacific region who are leading on climate action, sustainable cities, disability rights, financial inclusion, and more in building our collective resilience. Our speakers in this series all happen to be UNDRR Leadership Award finalists or winners, and they'll be sharing their leadership journey, including most successful practices, and I hope to hear about some of their most spectacular failures as well as innovative approaches that fall maybe somewhere in between. We do hope that this frank and open discussion will help to foster collaboration and connection among the diverse women working in disaster risk reduction and the men who are supporting them. We also know that those of you listening in are leading resilience in your communities in many, many ways, and there's a lot that we can share and learn from each other. I encourage you to use the chat, and not just for your questions, but also to share your experiences and to connect with each other. For those of you less familiar with the UNDRR network, the Women's International Network for Disaster Risk Reduction, this is UNDRR's flagship women's leadership program. It was established in the Asia-Pacific region 4 years ago, and since then has continued to grow. A similar network has also now been established in Latin America and the Caribbean. There are 4 key components of UNDRR: building the evidence base for women's leadership, strengthening leadership capacities, recognizing and celebrating women's achievement, and supporting institutions to enhance women's leadership. I won't go into all of these in more detail now, but I'll share some links in the chat where you can find out more, and you can also sign up to join UNDRR network if you're not already a member. I do just want to take a few minutes to talk about one highlight of the UNDRR calendar, which is about recognizing and celebrating women's achievements, and that's our annual UNDRR Leadership Awards. Now, this is the 4th year of those awards, and nominations are now open. The UNDRR Leadership Awards this year will be presented at the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction, being held in Manila, Philippines from the 14th to the 17th of October. This year, once again, we have 2 awards. The Rising Star Award, which has a cash prize of $7,500, will be granted to an individual woman who has demonstrated commitment to a career in disaster risk reduction and leadership potential early on. The UNDRR Excellence Award, which is proudly sponsored by SM Prime and has an award prize of $10,000, will be granted to an individual woman who has achieved exceptional professional success in DRR. Here you can see quotes from the inaugural winners. Vasiti Soko from Fiji on the left won the 2021 Excellence Award, proudly supported by SM Prime, and Rama Hanifa on the right from Indonesia won the Rising Star Award that same year. You can nominate yourself or someone who inspires you. And as I'm involved in the shortlisting the nominations, I did just want to take a moment to share some tips before you all go away and nominate someone. So first, please focus on the quality of your nomination. What is included in the nomination is what the adjudication panel will be reviewing. In the past, some people have run mini campaigns to try and get as many people as possible to nominate them. While that's a fantastic initiative, the quantity of nominations you receive makes no difference. It's really the quality that matters. You only need 1 nomination to win. Number 2, please make sure you're nominating in the right award category. Has the nominee really already achieved exceptional professional success, or are they really demonstrating leadership potential and a commitment to a career? This isn't necessarily about the age of the nominee. Both categories are really extremely competitive. So consider where your nominee is at in their DRR career and make sure you're clear about why you're nominating them for that category. Number 3, please be specific about the impact that the nominee's work has had. The more specific, the better. For example, saying that the nominee has worked to build resilience in schools across the country doesn't tell us a great deal. Saying that she has facilitated training in more than 200 schools, training more than 1,000 volunteers, including teachers, on school safety and child-centered DRR, and that she has personally reached over 20,000 people in 30 provinces with disaster education, like our 2022 Rising Star Award finalist from Indonesia, Mariana Paradidi, that's much more impactful. Disaster risk reduction is a diverse field. So provide details on what specific aspects of disaster risk reduction the nominee is working in and what disaster risks their work is addressing. For example, saying that the nominee is reducing tsunami risks faced by communities. Well, there's a lot of different ways someone could do that. But by saying that the nominee initiated the establishment of the Oceania Regional Seismic Network between Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, and Samoa, to improve tsunami detection systems in the region and to improve early warning systems across the Pacific, so that tsunami warnings reach communities faster, enabling those who are in the tsunami's path to get to higher ground. And this is like our 2022 UNDRR Excellence Award winner, Eslin Garabiti. That paints a very clear picture of the work that's being done. Number 4, we can't all reach everyone. Being explicit about the community that is benefiting from the nominee's work will help the adjudication panel understand the impact. For example, 2022 UNDRR Rising Star Award winner, Dr. Homalata Bora's work focuses on the diverse communities living in the world's largest inhabited river island of Majuli in the state of Assam in India. There's not many people living in that island, but her impact has been significant. 2023 Rising Star Award winner Abia Akram's work focuses on women with disabilities through the National Forum of Women with Disabilities in Pakistan. By being explicit about the community that's benefiting, we get a better idea of the nominee's work. Finally, the nomination form asks how the nominee demonstrates leadership. UNDRR doesn't define or specify what type of leadership. So use this question to really share what leadership means to you and the impact that this person is having. You can nominate via this link here. And if you have any specific questions about the UNDRR Awards, please reach out to UNDRR-WinDRRAP@un.org. We have already received over 70 nominations, and the nominations have only been open for a week or so. So please do get in. You still have another month and a half. So please think about who you can nominate, and we look forward to receiving your excellent nominations. Finally, we'll hear from our 2023 Excellence Award winner today, and I'm sure she'll have some more tips about what this award has done and how she's taken the work forward following the recognition of the UNDRR Award. Thank you very much for joining. Back to you, Danny.
Thank you so much, Branwen and Dr. Tata. We're going to very quickly just transition. I will give a short introduction for our wonderful guest speaker today. Ms. Shaila Shahid, an environmental lawyer from Dhaka, Bangladesh, serves on the advisory board for Tomorrow's Cities, the Urban Disaster Risk Hub, tackling climate and disaster risks for the urban poor. She also advances gender inclusivity in climate action as the chair of the board of directors of GenderCC, Women for Climate Justice. Her expertise extends to her role as senior advisor to the Pitachara Forest and Biodiversity Conservation Initiative and her involvement with the National Alliance for Drowning Prevention. Shaila's career, marked by over 20 years in both technical and managerial capacities, includes a significant tenure as the former Chief Operating Officer of the Disaster Climate Change Unit at the Department of Public Health Engineering. Her exemplary leadership in climate, DRR, gender, water, and environmental law and policies was recognized with the 2023 UNDRR Leadership Excellence Award. Let's please give a round of applause virtually for Ms. Shaila Shahid.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Daniel, for this wonderful introduction. Can you hear me all? I think I'm audible. And I really like to extend my sincere thanks and to Dr. Tata and Branwen Miller from UNDRR. It was really a great honor for me, and I'm really feeling happy today to be here to join with all of you. Especially sincere thanks to UNDRR and WinDRR, which I feel this is an incredible platform to amplify women's voices, provide support for the women for their leadership in the DRR profession, and creating space for the women leading the pathways to build disaster resilience and fight against climate change. So to me, I mean, I have been working since long for building disaster resilience and maintaining and ensuring gender mainstreaming and striving for gender inequality. And these are not the gender inequality and climate change and disaster. These are not separate challenges, definitely. And it is a kind of the trait multiplier to the women, especially we are talking about the women, how women building resilience in the Asia and Pacific and at the very ground level. So today's theme of this webinar, this is very close to my heart, and this subject and this work, I mean, I'm very deeply passionate about, and it's linked with my personal and professional values. So as I said, that disaster and climate change creating different kinds of obstacles for the women, and disaster and climate change are not gender neutral. But the good thing is, the inspiring thing is that There are more than 2 billion women and girls in Asia Pacific in this region, and they can really turn as solution multipliers. And they're really working hard as a change makers in the ground to create a difference, to building resilience at the very community level. Next slide, please. So I like to start by sharing some of my achievements and some of my legacy, and how far I have come, and my profession, how I came to the sector of disaster risk reduction and climate change. So I started. I'm coming from academic background of um, in different phases at Bangladesh and regional level and globally, for influencing for policy reform in favor of the women and the most marginalized. So trying to catalyzing positive change in the realm of disaster risk reduction and gender equality. So I have also experienced not only working in Bangladesh, but also in different parts of Asia, in different parts of Europe and USA too. I gained experience working with the very local level people in the very coastal zone of Bangladesh. I like to also share with you that how this recognition of this Leadership Excellence Award also supporting me to advance my work for extending support for the more marginalized group, more underprivileged group like women, disabled people, indigenous community. Next slide, please. So my current position already Daniel shared with you, but I'm also working in technical capacity and closely involved with UNDP Somalia at this moment with their Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, with their Ministry of Planning, Economic Development. You have already learned that I have worked as the Chief Operating Officer of the Disaster Climate Change Unit within the Bangladesh government. And I was extensively engaged for different kind of program design, DRR project design, advocacy, and coordination, particularly. Here, I also like to mention that since 2015-16, I was closely involved with UNDRR, and you might have heard also about the stakeholder engagement mechanism within the UNDRR system. So I was one of the founding member, very actively involved with the stakeholder engagement mechanism, and I worked for around 3 years as a policy advocacy coordinator of the stakeholder engagement mechanism, and I also lead the women's major group, DRR group, that is connected with the high-level political forum with the SDGs. So that's actually somehow build my capacity to continue providing support and to carry the voices of the marginalized community at the global platform. So I'm really honored to share this highlight today. Especially my extensive experience and the journey. I like to particularly mention here, maybe I'll also later share in my presentation, that the critical moment which motivated me to start working. I mean, that was a kind of awakening call for me to starting to have a lens and look for working in the environmental conservation area, in the disaster response area, because I'm one of the witness of the 1991 devastating cyclone that hit Bangladesh. in 1991 when I was a student, and I saw that how it destruct and devastated the whole community, the roads, even our home rooftop also got damaged because of that cyclone. So it killed more than 1,40,000 people in Bangladesh with a huge economic loss. So I saw firsthand the loss and damages that disaster uh, did. So that was a kind of motivation for myself to start having a different look and how we can build the build the capacity of the community to respond to the disaster. Next slide, please. So there are, before going to share some of the approaches that really become successful in my whole profession and carrying my legacy, I also like to share with you some of my working experience. As I mentioned with all of you, that I started as an environmental lawyer, and I very closely work with the Bangladesh government, particularly in supporting the Bangladesh government for having the Environment Conservation Act, environment conservation rules, and also establishing the environment court in the country, because I started my career by drafting a public interest litigation against the riverbed encroachment and the river pollution in the country. That was the Buriganga River, which is the lifeline of the Dhaka city. So, and after a few years, we came up with a very remarkable and milestone judgment from the government to protect and conserve the river. So that was the starting point, and that really provided me the motivation to continue working for the environment and for the betterment of the people, because I was actively engaged in the whole processes and collecting information, having community consultations, building the case for this environmental cause. And I also like to mention particularly that I was very closely involved with Bangladesh government, especially I myself provided a direct contribution for drafting the Bangladesh Water Act while I was working with WaterAid. And later on, that also gave me a huge insight and provide me a huge platform, especially working on safe water access and sanitation areas. But literally my transformation and the journey really influencing the government that started when I started working with the comprehensive disaster management program with that was one of the UNDP flagship program and project that closely worked with Bangladesh government. And for the first time, through this program, we started mainstreaming the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation approaches within the 14 key sectoral ministry in the country. And then later on, I also worked with Gender and Water Alliance as the team leader. But I'm not going into detail in every working experience, but just to share with all of you how in every steps my involvement with different organizations and my involvement with the government also supported me to extend necessary contributions and support to the local people, to the women, and also bringing the issues and causes of women in the table in the policy level discussion. Especially, I was very critically engaged with the Bangladesh government for drafting of the Disaster Management Act during my tenure with the Comprehensive Disaster Management Program. And that also supported me to continue having this leadership, pursuing the leadership for women's, creating a space for the women's voices and pursuing the cause of the women in the policy level discussions. But there had been a lot of challenges too. Challenges means that you are not always welcome. I mean, there are systematic barriers. There are not always adequate budget, adequate means, adequate adequate means of implementations and and all the support. Those were not ready all the time, and sometimes we are not always welcome in high level decision making forum, being a woman. So there had been always challenges, and very few women are in the leadership positions. But the thing is that you have to have the courage and the commitment, state first commitment to creating a more sustainable and equitable world, and bringing the benefits of how women's involvement can really create a difference in the whole process, and how by leaving them behind we cannot achieve the desired momentum in the whole process. So that was my learning, and we keep continue thriving to bring the women's cause in the discussion of the disaster policy making. Next slide, please. So here are some of my achievements and affiliations. As you all know, that I really felt humbled, and that was one of the highest recognition that I received, being a winner of 2023 UNDRR Leadership Award for Excellence. And before that, for my contribution, I also received the Mary Friend Myers Disaster Award in 2019. And after that, after receiving the UNDRR award, I was also elected as the chair of board of directors of the GenderCC, which is a global network of women working for climate justice that is based in Berlin. And we have a huge network of members exists globally who are working for disaster and climate change areas. And I also mentioned you about my involvement with the stakeholder engagement mechanism of UNDRR, and that also gave me immense honor when I was invited to deliver welcome speech in the Global Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction in 2019 in Geneva, Switzerland. So I'm not going into detail of all this, but in 2018 also, because of my work and consistent persuasion for including women's and gender issues into the disaster risk reduction and in building community resilience, and also my involvement at the regional level. I was closely involved and till now active member of Asia Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism. So I was also nominated as lead discussant in the high level political forum on SDG 11, Building Resilient Cities and Communities, invited by the ECOSOC president in 2018. So I really wanted to share all these achievements and affiliations with all of you, because I believe that this is somehow going to inspire the women or the young women or girls who are, who are based in different geographical locations, who are in a very highly vulnerable locations, and maybe this can provide hope to the DRR professionals for pursuing the DRR areas in their career paths. Next slide, please. So other than this, I really like to share with you some of my approaches that really went well, and that has been successful for pursuing the DRR career. So why women in DRR space? I know we have been continue talking about women's involvement in disaster risk reduction, but this very critical that we create that level of awareness and that level of understanding and realization among all level of stakeholders. Particularly, I like to talk more about the public health engineering aspects. I have worked with the constructions company, with the engineers. So it was very difficult to make them convinced about the issues of gender, the issues of binary people, the issues of different groups, how their needs, how their concerns can be included in the infrastructure project in the public health engineering. So that's very important that we have the educate information and knowledge. The reason, because women and children are 14 times more likely to die in disasters than men, and what's the behind this? Most of the time, from my experience, we also found that that not always the early warning information are developed and disseminated in a manner that can be really reach to the women. So warning information, we are really struggling how the coverage can be expanded, especially to reach the most marginalized. Women are, their mobilities are restricted. They are sometimes, due to different kind of socio-cultural factor, they are confined in their own community, sometimes at home. So there are religious factors that also work. They are not swimmers in most of the cases. That's a very important learning we have seen at the very local level. And most of the time they are caregivers. We also know that they don't want to leave the home, and there are also the risk of sexual assaults. And there are ample evidences available that when disaster strike, immediate after post-disaster scenario, women usually face different kinds of sexual assaults and harassments. But here I'm talking about the women, but I have been working for the gender mainstreaming in DRR. So when we talk about the gender issues, it does not always only equal the women, but we also need to talk about the intersectionality approaches. So not all women are the same positions. So and this is not always homogeneous. So that's the main thing that we need to know about the gender and DRR, the basic areas. So we keep continue advocating for providing this sort of information. And when I was with the Department of Public Health Engineering, for the first time, we developed a master manual that's reflected different phases of disaster, from preparations to planning to mitigation level to the response to the rebuilding, reconstruction and recovery level, how women's issues can be properly reflected, properly understood, and properly bring into the response, whole response mechanisms. So we developed this master manual for all the stakeholders, for all the service providers, not only from the government side, but also who are involved in different level for providing this sort of water and sanitation services and infrastructure services with the local government. So, I mean, that very often we come to know that disaster affect different groups of people differently, but we don't have adequate data also that which groups are more affected and become more marginalized due to the consistent different kinds of impacts of disaster, and that one side does not fit all. And we continue hearing about that women are more vulnerable and they die more in disaster, but we often don't focus on the strength of the women. Especially how they are contributing in the society. And the lack of sex and gender disaggregated data, that's another areas that we really need to continue working on. There are social stigmas, socioeconomic barriers, poverty, and these also silence and created limiting opportunities for a different level of social groups, including the women and young girls. Next slide, please. So as I said, that we need to continue working on the intersectionality approaches, not only the gender equality. And it's not about that adding different social groups, because when we talk about different race, ethnicities, sexualities, class and caste, that is equally important, that this is about the diversity and inclusion. But intersectionality is sometimes people actually mistakes about this concept and approaches, because it's bringing about the intersections of one or more of these categories together, and how the different intersections of people are being impacted differently within a same scenario or within a same context. So this can multiply the experience or impacts both in positive and negative ways. So that was one of the key aspects that we included also in our master manual training for trainers on disaster risk reduction. Next slide, please. So as I said in the very beginning, that we need to continue also advocating women's strength in the disaster risk reduction, in the whole disaster risk management, because we don't want to portray women always as a victim of the disaster. This is very important that we address the structural inequality and barriers and obstacles that women are facing, but also we know that women are the key actors in building and shaping and sustaining resilient communities. They have the endowed wisdom. They have that level of capacity and communication capability to influence others. They have a wide range of connections in the community. And I often feel that they are the faces of resilience, and an invisible force of resilience that they are really need to bring into the surface. And especially the women and young girls, they play a most important role in their families and communities. I mean, in food security, in water and sanitation areas, in health, education, and childcare, and also caring the old age people. And often we also hear that women cannot be involved in the technical and some of the high risk work, but they keep continue working even on those areas. So that's equally important that we provide adequate information and have adequate safeguards for the women when they are involved this sort of drudgery work, because they are also involved equally for building houses, digging wells and ditches. They're working alongside with the men even in the field, so for building a different level of water and sanitation and big infrastructure. So that's very important that we provide adequate safeguard for the women. We need to have adequate safeguard policy, and what are the issues that really impacting women. And they can really influence all level of community people with their support. So they are really becoming the change makers in the community for building the community resilience at the very ground level. So next slide, please. So we often continue listening at what stage of DRR should we include gender, or should we include the women? Next slide, please. So that is the thing that we most often receive this sort of question, especially from the engineer. And this is another areas that really need a special focus, because I work directly with the engineer, and they often think that engineering is a very technical matter, and it's difficult for them to resonate the social aspects, specifically the gender aspects at every stage of engineering and construction areas. So we know that disaster stages are complex and interconnected. So at all stages, I mean, that is the response from our side, that at all stages, it's very crucial to include and to have a gender lens, and to include the causes, the response mechanism, the needs of the women and marginalized people. So be it in the planning, in the emergency planners, for the disaster managers, in the mitigation areas, in the response mechanism. I also worked in the refugee context in Bangladesh. So at every aspects, we need to continue involving the women, especially the reconstruction, recovery in the infrastructure projects for designing any architectural design. And some little modifications, retrofitting kind of initiatives can really bring big changes and can provide huge support to the women at different stages. Of building disaster response and disaster management. So these are often linked to different seasons, geographical locations, geophysical conditions, and professions, practitioners of different sectors. So it's very important that we have a kind of multi-sectoral approach for building disaster resilience. And it's from my learning, I also saw that people need to be aware of the risk those are associated with any kind of huge infrastructure or any kind of investment level. So a kind of risk interdependencies across sector, private sector engagement, those are sometimes become one of the key challenges. And one of the caveat I really like to highlight here, that we must ensure that all resources are made available at the local level to enable the implementation of DRS strategies. Especially, we need to follow the basic principles of the Sendai framework and connecting this with the government level. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to provide detailed information on this because I'm representing Bangladesh. So while sharing the context of Asia Pacific region and also the context of Bangladesh, you can see that Bangladesh is one of the most highly climate vulnerable country and one of the disaster prone countries. So we have all kinds of disaster in our country, like drought, flash flood, salinity intrusion, and cyclone. We very often frequently face and encounter different level of tropical cyclone to severe cyclone, and these often cause the most destruction, like recurring events, lingering aftermath, complex recovery. So, because I'm sharing the public health context. From Bangladesh overview. So I really like to provide you with a snapshot of the country Bangladesh. But this is really inspiring at the global level, that Bangladesh has shifted the paradigm from response relief oriented to the comprehensive adaptation, disaster management approach and risk reduction culture since mid 1980s. And we have significantly reduced the fatalities in the country and the loss and damages in the country. And Bangladesh also worked, kind of championing the cause of disaster management, because they have developed some very inspiring and good policies. Policies at the national level. We also have a standing orders on disaster. We also have a national plan for disaster management, especially the standing orders on disaster combined responsibilities of each stakeholder within the government, all the ministries and all the local government, all the urban government, how to do, what to do when any disaster strike. Even throughout the year, any sort of preparation level, how the whole coordination mechanism should work, those are linked. And Bangladesh has developed all this kind of very transformative policy mechanism at the national level. Next slide, please. So I started working during the time of COVID-19, and we know that when COVID-19 occurred, it was an unprecedented event. The crisis was a kind of triple burden: poverty, COVID-19, and disasters and climate change. So these all push factors really at that moment created different kinds of threats and decrease in productivity and increase a different level of health risk and rising insecurity. But these are all kind of scenario that we also usually face during any disaster. In the context of Bangladesh, women and girls are responsible for water collection in 90% of households, especially in the rural locations. And the water and sanitation facilities, in absence of water and sanitation facilities, girls' attendance hugely impacted, especially girls drop out in the school. And more than 1 in 4 girls miss school during menstruation in the country. So these are the things we need to remember, particularly while working in the coastal zone, how disaster really impacts the women's sexual and reproductive health, and also when the basic public health infrastructure are damaged during disaster. While Bangladesh has managed to reduce the mortality rate due to cyclones and other natural disasters in the past 20 years, still, the data says that women still constitute 80% of fatalities and different level of loss and damage. Non-economic losses and damage, most of the time women are the main they carry the key burden of non-economic loss and damage. Next slide, please. So the basic questions that we used to ask while designing any projects and program, how we are going to bring the gender equality and intersectionality concept, and how this play a role in building disaster resilience for especially for the infrastructure projects. And during my time with the Department of Public Health Engineering, for the first time, we also conducted, to find out these questions and the answers, we also conducted the gender analysis, which is, I think, one of the also very important areas that we, before designing any project, we need to have a kind of gender analysis and gender assessments in different areas to have proper information about the gender issues and women's participations, women's representations, and how much policy and program and projects are responsive to the needs of the women. And we also try to find out what are the key lessons learned and coping mechanisms from the global south, because I'm talking about the Asia Pacific region, to ensure that DRR interventions are inclusive and contributing that women benefit from gender mainstreaming in DRR. Next slide, please. So, drawing the lessons from the public health perspective, so gender and DRR intersections and interface, it is evident that that infrastructure is not gender neutral, and gender and intersectional analysis of the current situation can really provide better tools and scrutinizing of barriers in service delivery for both women and girls, and particularly for the marginalized and the disabled and elderly people, and other vulnerable groups those are exposed to the natural hazards. Although we are talking about natural hazards, but there has been a lots of things directly involved, that disasters are no more naturals, because all these man-made activities are somehow contributing for happening the recurring occurrence of the disaster and hazards. So we found that the gaps in access to good infrastructure really affect women disproportionately, and women need to have the voice, and women need to be involved in the design of this infrastructure, and in setting priorities in design and the operational sustenance of those infrastructure. So we develop different tools, how this can be different tools and checklists, especially for the engineers, and we organize trainings for the service delivery, for the constructive workers, and for the consulting agency who are involved in the process. So we did that at different tier till to the local governance level. So in the infrastructure areas, the reconstruction and recovery phases are very critical. And most of the time we saw that these are often dominated by technical experts, and the approaches also, they try to see from the top level. So we need to have a kind of community-driven, inclusive, bottom-up approaches to bring these issues. And not only it's always useful to have only the checklist, but we also try to organize different reflection session, inviting women at different tiers to share their experience, how not involving women's concern and needs into the infrastructure design are really impacting them, like socio-cultural situations, and like going beyond the technical areas, where to put the water and sanitations, and the latrine and the water points, in which situation, especially in the cyclone shelter. That's also very important. And as I mentioned, that how to be a reflexive practitioner and professional. So we also try to provide these sort of basic gender criteria and norms to be included into the design program, and to have better awareness, especially to the engineers and the professionals, and the training manual that we developed and provided training to all different level of engineers and planners, and also especially to the team who are responsible for designing any specific projects. Next slide, please. And we came up with the analysis of the costs and benefits for gender in disaster infrastructure. So there are, we usually in the training session, we try to show the stakeholders and the engineers that there are costs involved to being gender unaware and unresponsive, and there are benefits to bring the gender issues and being gender aware and responsive. So the structures being built may only serve a minority or selected group, and those are not that much effective. Next slide, please. And there are opportunity costs also involved in failing to reach the majority of population while building any specific infrastructure. Next slide, please. And this cost also impact women in worst case scenario, that the built infrastructure sometimes may be dangerous to some groups, like if it is poorly lit or silted latrines, which put women and girls at risk of violence. If it is built in a place that creates a distance to go there, and not adequate privacy are maintained. So these are the issues that needs to be always taken care of, especially for the pregnant women, for young girls. Next slide, please. And there are immense benefits for about bringing the gender issues and awareness, and how those infrastructure can be made more responsive. Like inclusive design and planning provides added value. It can really help spin off benefits to women and other marginalized groups, and how this can link with other cross-cutting areas of SDGs, like leaving no one behind and contributing to poverty reductions, especially for destitute women and other marginalized groups. Next slide, please. So quickly, I like to share with you some of the key focus and approach that we really pursued from the Disaster Climate Change Unit, and those really worked. And really supported in terms of bringing the benefits and disaster and desired outcome. So we keep continue for sector coordination mechanism and partnership for disaster and climate change adaptation, disaster response and risk informed development. So as I said that a cross-sectoral approach is very much important, especially with water and sanitation sector, food security, agricultural sector. Uh, and we try to create a platform for that, and we developed the risk communications community engagement process and guidelines while building this sort of infrastructure project. We also for the first time bring and establishing monitoring of disaster response and climate change adaptation interventions to enhance effectiveness and efficiencies. And for the first time, we also come up with the sex, age, disability disaggregated data and particular gender responsive indicators to be included and linked with the SDG monitoring mechanism that's being led by the Prime Minister's office in Bangladesh. And we also established a water and sanitation dashboard in the Department of Public Health Engineering, and we provided specific gender responsive indicators to be maintained and to collect information and data from the local governance level. And we also supported the Department of Public Health Engineering to develop the Gender Action Plan. So we developed the Gender Equality and Inclusion Guideline Module and Gender Action Plans for capacity development and mobilization to build community resilience at all levels. So the key areas, the Gender Action Plan for different tiers and different professionals, it was a short-term, medium-term and long-term Gender Action Plan. And we also try to bring the financing areas, especially the DRR financing areas, how this can be included, and always there should be incentives and specific budget allocated for implementation of this Gender Action Plan. Next slide, please. And how to incorporate gender-related issues in DRR emergency response and planning. We also try to link this with the integrated water resources management and integrated waste management areas. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So from my long experience, I felt that focusing on gender is important because it offers an huge opportunity to advance gender equality. And some of the key areas that always need to be looked at and always need to be involved in the in any sort of project design to project implementation phase, that we need to have systematic capacity building, understanding the gender roles, particular vulnerable group, and how to target the hard to reach areas. And provide capacity building support to different level of groups and stakeholders, gender responsive indicators, inclusion of sex, age, and disability disaggregated data with quantitative targets and qualitative interpretations, different tools. Those are very important. Gender responsive technology areas, as I said, we provided specific guidelines and included those in the training manual, how to design or where to put water points, design of toilet, access to the new technology and innovation, like rainwater harvesting, early warning mechanism should be responsive to the gender needs, gender budgeting. This is very important areas, that social protection and finance, and DRR related insurance mechanism and economic response and recovery should always consider the gender issues, especially for resource allocations involving the gender responsive analysis of budget priorities, the distribution pattern at all level. Those need to be always prioritized from the lens of gender perspectives, and overall the DRR governance to create a kind of ownership, transparency, and accountability of all the resources those are being invested. These DRR governance always need to have the gender lens. Next slide, please. So the DRR take-home messages from my side that we need to avoid the simple checklist stereotypes, and as I said, the different gender groups. For this, we definitely need to practicing applying the intersectionality approach, because not all women are equal. And we don't always need to see women as vulnerable, because they are not always vulnerable. Even though within the very limited resources, they are always fighting back hard and building back better and contributing for building community resilience at all levels. And women as end users with equal opportunities and benefits, we need to continue advocating for these women as stakeholders with their voice and visibility, women as leaders and policymakers. And for this, affirmative action may be needed for rebalancing the structural inequalities. And at the grassroots level, I particularly like to mention here that women leaders can ensure that the specific needs of the women and vulnerable groups are accounted for, and how they can be linked with the governance mechanism. And from my experience, I also saw that women leaders are seen to play a vital role in identifying and advocating for the specific needs of the women in disaster. So the greater inclusion of women leaders in local level decision making, providing all the support to the women professionals, and that needs to continue our good for within the senior level decision making space. And I mean, for this also we need to provide more support and finance to the women's agency, to the women's organizations. For particularly like to share the key messages here, that the first thing that we need to have a more social networks where women can freely share their voice. They can come up with their leadership role. They can really support other community members for improving preparedness and response. And secondly, women's caregiving responsibilities equip them with the ability to identify the most vulnerable groups. That's very important. And thirdly, there are examples of women holding local and traditional forms of knowledge, and we need to have a recognition of these. And we also need to continue addressing the structural inequalities, and particular incentives and financing for women's leadership, women's specific needs. Those needs to be continued. And the last slide, please. So today I'm feeling that I'm carrying the spirit of all the women with me here, especially who kept continue inspiring me at the very local level. Here I really like to show this last slide, because when we started working in any project, we need to have a specific exit strategy. And very often we also keep hearing from the women that what would happen with us when the project is over. So then they themselves start responding when we really provide them all the support and information and resources. They say that they are now better prepared. Now they have better information. They are more connected with the local governance mechanism, and they are now in a situation to overcome all the odds. So that's the inspiration. And I believe that together, through all the solidarities and the recognition of women professionals, their leadership, and through the multi-sectoral partnerships, we can tackle the common risks that threaten us, particularly the women, and we can make women the real change makers, and a recognition of their invisible force and their real contribution to as a change makers for building resilience at the very community level and national level. So I'm stopping here, and I welcome any sort of questions. Thank you all for your patience and being with me. I was really honored to share my experience to this platform, incredible platform that is supporting the women for their leadership since long in Asia Pacific region. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much, Miss Shaila. That was a wonderful discussion of all your experiences and everything that you've learned. Thank you for sharing that with us. We'd like to go now straight into the open forum. Ladies and gentlemen here today, please raise your hand to be recognized if you would like to ask your questions on video, or you may type your questions in the chat box and we will read them aloud for you. We have one question that's already here in the chat box, Ms. Shaila. The question is from Attorney Violeta Seva, from UNDRR and from the Earthquakes and Megacities Initiative. Her question is, what are the concrete programs or projects that have been implemented in Bangladesh that showcase mainstream gender and DRR?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to me. And I'm coming particularly to these questions. I like to start with that the Bangladesh government has developed a number of supporting policy for mainstreaming gender issues systematically in the disaster risk reduction. Particularly, the government came up with the specific guideline to include sex, age, disability, disaggregated data while designing any projects and programs. That guideline came from the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, and that is also included for conducting any sort of survey in the country. So we usually follow these guidelines in line with the SDG indicators in the country, whatever readily available information and data are available to connect at the national level. So particularly, I like to mention here one of the UN Women program, that is Empower, that really worked with the Ministry of Disaster Management to extend support, especially building the resilience of the women and marginalized groups. There are South Asian GRIPP projects. There are specific projects from the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, where I extended support to develop the risk reduction action plan of the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs in the country. But also we came up with the specific gender responsive DRR indicators for the 14 key ministries in the country during my time with the comprehensive disaster management program that closely worked with the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief. And during my tenure with the role of Chief Operating Officer of the Disaster Climate Change Unit, we also developed risk reduction and RCCE guidelines, the risk communications and community engagement guideline. The whole guideline particularly focused on how different social vulnerable groups, women and marginalized community, the indigenous group, the disabled group, old age group, they can be properly involved and integrated in the all the phases of disaster management. Not only that, we also developed gender action plan for different departments and ministries in the country. And particularly, I like to mention about another project, especially that project is the WISE project. From this project, we created a hub within the Department of Public Health Engineering for providing business support and financing support to the women entrepreneurs who were involved in doing business for providing water and sanitation technology and DRR technological support at the very grassroots level. So these are some of the milestone activities and some of the very effective projects and programs. I closely work with the government, but I know that there are different other international organizations and national level organizations who are actively working to bridge the gap to reduce the risk of the women and bringing the voice of the women at the national level. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shaila, for that wonderfully comprehensive answer to the first question. We have another one here in the chat box, and then let's give first one to the raised hand. I'd like to call on Ms. Georgina Hernandez from the Galing Pook Foundation in the Philippines to ask her question. Please go ahead, Ms. Georgina.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Georgina. We're from a non-government organization in the Philippines that promotes people's participation and empowerment and governance. So my question is, how do you ensure that the participation of women is inclusive, and what are the challenges that women face in managing their responsibilities, balancing their responsibilities, so that they're still able to continue to meaningfully engage and participate in resilience initiatives?
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions. I also particularly like to highlight that we very closely work with, during my role with the Department of Public Health Engineering and also with the Bangladesh government, we very closely worked not only the rural context, the local government level, but also worked with the Municipality Association of Bangladesh, the MAP. And from the MAP, we supported the Municipality Association of Bangladesh to establish the JC unit, that is called Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Unit. So why I'm mentioning this particular platform, that these platform really serve how to extend support to the women, especially the grassroots women, the local women leaders, and local women's agency and organizations. But it's not always easy to connect them. Because the system not always permit for their full participations and to bring their voices in the process. So one of the challenges is to identify, to have a database of the women who are involved in the process. So even during the process of identifying the women entrepreneurs for the specific project that we designed in my unit, so we need to conduct a kind of landscape mapping of who are the women involved, what are the organizations that really pursuing the DRR issues and building a kind of interface of gender and DRR aspects. So we usually try to make a list of that women organizations and try to bring them in different local tiers so that they can share their particular problems. But one of the challenges also we kept continue facing about the financing areas. So I think we still need to keep continue working on the DRR financing areas where we can ensure specific quota for the women-led organizations who are actively working for reducing the risk at the local level. And we also have the local tier of union level disaster management committee. We don't always see equal women participation in the disaster management committee due to different socio-cultural barriers and religious factors that hampers sometimes women's participation in those committee. So for this, more awareness raising program needs to be continued. And I also felt that there are challenges about the early warning mechanism reaching to the women. I think that there is no alternative for more expanded campaign program, and there is no alternative that we need to keep continue providing specific training to the engineers, to different professionals, to have the basic understanding about the gender and issues and gender and DRR aspects, so that they can systematically reflect these. And there are no alternatives that we keep continue advocating for women's meaningful participations to create some specific quota in any kind of committee. Because most of the time we see that only 30% women representation are usually create mandatory for any sort of committee. But while ensuring this 30% mandatory participation of women, we don't always see that level of qualitative leadership coming from the women's group. So that level of identification and providing further support, further capacity building support to the women, that's very important and critical, so that we can really create a balance and win-win situation for the women's group and agency. So the three key areas, as I said, that we need to have particular budget and investment for women. In the DRR financing areas, always need to have some specific quota for the women-led agencies and organizations. Technological areas and early warning mechanism should be more gender responsive and gender sensitive, so that this can reach to the women and women can understand the language and how to respond to the mechanism. And in any sort of committee, we need to have a more participation of the women. So these are the key challenges areas we usually face. And there is no alternative that we continue working to have more accelerated speed and progress of women's participation in these key critical areas.
Okay, thank you for that. We have another hand raised. I'd like to turn over. You're welcome to unmute. Nahid Siddiqui, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and it is really a great for us. I'm Bangladeshi also, so congratulations, Ms. Shahid. And I would like to ask two different questions. One is when it is about urban area, what is the government actually taking initiative for the women, especially the women and children and the disabilities in the urban area? Because when I have trying to research on these issues, especially the public health issue, I did get very few information and researches. And my second question is, when we are actually creating the rural leadership, especially in the women community, do we have any initiative by the organization of the government that they are just going to research or investigate whether these leaders are sustained for the long? I mean, when we are developing leaders after the project phase out, maybe they are doing their activities 1 or 2 years, and they just get demotivated to doing this. So, can you just tell us about me?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your question. So I can share from my experience and my involvement with the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, but my recent involvement with the Disaster Climate Change Support Unit. So I told you about that within the Municipality Association of Bangladesh in urban context, the JC unit was established, the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Unit. So all the women councillors and the women commissioners who are regularly being communicated and provide supported for the capacity building training to address the issues of the women. But I equally understand that it's not always the very supportive scenario that the grassroots women's organizations are always communicated in proper manner. So I, as I said, that we need to continue providing and disseminating this message to the people from the government side, and this JC unit also need to be very strengthened. And resource scarcity is one of the main problem, not only for the government but also equally to the women organizations while providing this sort of support. But another issue, I can assure you that the new infrastructure and all the cyclone shelter that are being built newly, they are always considering and considering the specific guidelines provided by the cyclone shelter reconstruction guideline from the Bangladesh government. So women's issues and what would be the design, what would be the specific space for women's water support, water and sanitation support, toilet, and how this can be accessed by the pregnant women, disabled women. These issues are now being taken care of by that specific guideline from the government. I think we also know that in the urban context in Bangladesh, we have a huge chunk of urban volunteers available who are working equally with the Red Crescent and other international organizations, and with the with the fire department in Bangladesh. So adequate number of women and young girls are involved as urban volunteers. So they are also working in the urban context of Dhaka and other main cities, so far in my knowledge. So that's from the urban context, but this needs to be more strengthened. I equally agree with you. And coming to the point of the rural context, I think any project that needs to have a kind of exit strategy and how the initiatives going to be sustained, how the leadership built, how the capacity building support provided to the local community, how they are going to continue working and motivated at the community level. So this needs to be well strategized and included in the very beginning of implementing any sort of project. But also for creating local ownership, we need to have a kind of leveraging and making stronger the local level community-led organization. So community-led disaster risk reduction approaches, initiatives that needs to be connected properly with the different level of disaster management committee. And it should not be always from the motivation comes from the government, but also the local people. That's their problems, that their areas, and they are the first responder. So they need to be always, vocal, have the inspiration to get connected with the local government level. So kind of playing active role for mitigating any kind of risk and taking proactive actions with the support of the government. So this sort of partnership approach, community building approach that needs to be nurtured from both the community people, community-led organizations, and equally from the government and local government side. So the community leaders, they can really make the government accountable. So I think these are happening in the country. But as I said, that the project for intervening any kind of project, local people needs to be involved in the very beginning of designing that project, especially particularly in the local context. And as I said, from the Department of Public Health Engineering, we have developed the risk communications and community engagement guideline. So these guidelines also have particular directions how local people should be involved in the whole process of designing and delivering any project outcome.
We have time for one more question, and the question comes from Ms. Maria Bianca Perez. She is a DRR officer here in Quezon City, Philippines. Her question is, what are the implementation challenges you faced in ensuring gender sensitivity in your programs? How did you address them?
Thank you so much once again. I think I have already tried to highlight some of the implementation challenges. As I said, that identifying the women leaders, creating a space for their participations in different committees, creating a space for the women to freely share their opinion, to have their voice, to have adequate incentives, to have adequate means of implementation for any projects and program. Those are some of the key and critical implementation challenges that we usually face from the government side, but equally from the civil society side. So as I mentioned, even I myself also encountered different level of challenges and obstacles and structural inequalities within the government, because in a patriarchal society, we need to sensitize more men and the high-level officials about the role and contribution of the women, how they are really playing change makers' role, and how they are really bringing the benefits into the table, because we cannot leave those marginalized group and women behind. So they are not, as I said, they are not always welcome in the high-level decision-making process. But for this, I think one of the key aspects is if we conduct the gender analysis or gender assessment from the institutional level, that's really going to support that in which areas women's participations, women's role, these are lacking, what are the key challenges. So a systematic analysis and gender assessment, I would suggest that's very critical in any organizational context, that really give you the basic information where to invest and where to contribute and what to prioritize first to respond to the needs of the women. There are challenges also. We need to have more capacity building support for the women. We need to have more women coming into the DRR professions and in the DRR study, DRR professionalization course, and all these kind of things, so that women are more aware about all this DRR policy and all these different vulnerable contexts, and they feel more inspired and willing to come to this profession, because I mean, as many as women, they keep continue coming into this profession, so the space and the platform is going to be widened. So this and when a woman is in a higher position or in any sort of leadership position, they really need to keep continue supporting the other women. So for creating the space, for creating that platforms, and supporting any sort of policy reform in favor of the women. So that from my side, I have continued and tried to do this within my capacity. As I said, that we, for the first time within the Department of Public Health Engineering, we established the Gender Forum, Gender and Development Forum. We developed the Gender Action Plan. We started providing specific budget for any actions that is supporting the women. We really created a list of women, how specific training and capacities building support can be provided to the women. So we need to have this systematic checklist, providing adequate budget and financing for women's participations, creating the space where women can share their thoughts and opinion freely, and bringing women more, particularly by creating quota system. When we don't find competitive women's participation, in that case, I really prefer to have some sort of affirmative actions to bring how to bring women and marginalized community in the process. So these are some of the areas we need to keep continue working on. That's from my experience.
Okay, we just have time for one more question. There's an important question from Maudi from USAID Bear Ikan. The question is, DRR intersects with other issues such as climate change, fisheries, and health. How can we work collaboratively with other sectors, especially in the gender perspective lens?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think I have been working for bringing these intersections since long, because I'm coming from environmental law background, but I am equally working in the climate change adaptation areas. And I also led the disaster climate change unit within the public health sector. So the main thing is we need to have a kind of inclusive approach for bringing these gender issues together. Inclusive approach means that disaster and climate issues are very closely interconnected, and particularly in the loss and damage areas, where we can see the direct impacts of climate change and disaster areas for this loss and damage. And at the country level also, in Bangladesh and in different countries, from the COP, we now have the loss and damage fund, and the countries are also trying to develop the national level loss and damage framework. So while developing this national level loss and damage framework, we need to bring the issues of women into the whole process, because not only the economic losses, but most of the time women are more susceptible and more vulnerable due to the non-economic losses, because the social issues, women's caregiving role, we cannot always quantify those in monetary manner. So these are the intersectional areas that needs to be built within the whole system. And while developing gender responsive indicators, we can think about these as a complex interconnected system, because when disasters strike, it equally creating impacts in the food security, it equally creating impacts in the water and sanitation access, it's equally creating impacts in the fisheries sector that you mentioned, and also it is impacting women's health, women's sexual and reproductive health rights. So we need to bring the multi-sectoral approach, inclusive approach, and bringing a synergies within all these sectors. We cannot continue working in silos. So at the very local level, within these small tier and community or the committee, those are available. These compounding impacts and effects needs to be brought together at the same table. We can address those issues not in silos, not in isolation, but in an integrated manner. That's why it's very important to apply the integrated approach. So from my department, as I mentioned, that we try to have the DRR and CCA mainstreaming in all the infrastructure project, but also within the integrated water resources management and within the integrated waste management. So the thing is, whenever you are dealing with any specific sector or areas, you need to have the DRR and CCA indicators and gender lens, so that this can really provide as a guideline to systematically integration of women's issues and gender issues into any project delivery. So that is the key to continue. Building these intersections together, all these cross-sectoral areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shaila, and thank you to everyone who asked the questions. Thank you so much for joining us today.